Thank you. I do want to go ahead and get started on time and shortly. And before I do that, I just want to thank the Land Rally. This is a part of their virtual land rally. So though it's being hosted by New Jersey Audubon, this is a land rally event. So 25th annual land rally is virtual this year, and we're doing a series of programs. And this is just one of them that you can be a part of. And these are all the sponsors that participate in the rally. And there's also a whole planning committee as well that we'll show you on the next slide. And so I just want to remind everybody that, thank you. Those are that's the planning committee. And then I just want to remind everybody that there is a question and answer section that you can use to ask our presenters questions. We are going to do all of the question and answer at the end of the presenter, all three presenters. So it'll be approximately 45 minutes to an hour of presentation. And then at the end, we'll give you guys some time to ask questions. But I want you to know that as soon as you think of a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A, and that'll be ready there for us when we're ready to take on the questions and answer portion of the presentation. We have three very qualified presenters for you here today for our Urban Green Spaces workshop. And those presenters are Eileen Murphy, the Vice President of Government Relations, Kelly Wenzel, Project Director of Urban Education and Outreach, and Kristen Milocrane, the Senior Research Scientist, all New Jersey Audubon employees, all fantastic women in science. And so I just want to go ahead and kick things off, and we can get started with Eileen as our first presenter. Thank you, and go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay, and thanks for organizing this on behalf of New Jersey Audubon. We're so happy to be sponsors and contributors to the Land Rally 2021. It's our honor and privilege. Thank you. So again, we're going to present some case studies, talk about some policy work that we're doing focused on urban green spaces in New Jersey, both the work that we've done in the past, we've done a lot, and work that we hope to expand upon in the future. So again, I am Eileen Murphy, Vice President for Government Relations at New Jersey Audubon, and I'm going to have Kristen and Kelly at this time just introduce themselves so you can associate their names with their faces. So Kelly, go ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kelly Wenzel, Project Director for Urban Education Outreach with New Jersey Audubon.
And hi, good afternoon. I'm Kristen Milocrane, Senior Research Scientist, also with New Jersey Audubon. So thank you for being here.
Okay, and Kelly has graciously offered to be our slide advancer. Thank you. You knew where I was going with that. All right, a little bit about our holistic approach at New Jersey Audubon, because you can't talk about green spaces in urban areas until you talk about green spaces everywhere. Our goal is to connect all people with all of nature, whether that nature is in the wild or the nature is in the wilds of your backyard or in your cityscapes. So we do this in 4 different ways through our 4 different departments, and focused on habitat, wildlife, and people. So beginning with people, education and outreach, we bring conservation programs to members and to all residents in the state, where they live, where they work, where they play. We welcome members and the public to a network of our nature centers, sanctuaries, and strategic conservation projects, both physical locations at our centers and a lot of outreach. We go to there. We go to schools, places where we don't necessarily have a center or a physical building. We bring our expertise and our enthusiasm to the classroom. In habitat and wildlife stewardship, we engage private landowners, public land managers, farmers, foresters, industry and corporate partners, and anyone that owns and works on the land to undertake actions to steward, restore, and enhance habitat. Because when you enhance and protect habitat, you protect the wildlife that depends on the habitat. We also do a lot of research and monitoring because our stewardship is science-based, as is all the activities at New Jersey Audubon. We use sound scientific principles and practices to design and implement, evaluate, and adapt projects and programs, not just in the state of New Jersey, not just in the United States, but globally. You know why? Because the birds don't recognize those boundaries. The birds migrate from the top of the earth to the bottom of the earth, and our scientists are there to track that travel. Research is so important to understand the importance of habitat. And to determine to assess the importance of habitat in New Jersey. The habitat in New Jersey influences how those birds make their treks, say from Tierra del Fuego at the tip of South America, all the way up to the Canadian Arctic. New Jersey is important in that migratory scheme. And then finally, but not least importantly, is our public policy and advocacy work, which is linked to everything else. We engage our members. We work with local, state, and federal government and agencies, businesses, and especially other nonprofits to advance the conservation of wildlife and habitat through direct lobbying, participation in rulemaking and policy implementation, and deployment of a broad activist network, not just of our own, but of all of our partners combined. Next slide. Okay, so we lead efforts throughout the state to create and restore healthy forest and grassland habitat, coasts and wetlands, and urban suburban landscapes. So we look at our work as doable pieces, narrowing the focus so that we can actually achieve results. You have to have specific narrow goals in order to achieve them and in order to measure them. Our efforts empower our partner organizations and public and private landowners to nurture and grow healthy habitat for wildlife. We're very much concerned with endangered and threatened species. Among those species whose habitat we seek to improve are the golden-winged warbler. You'll hear about that a little bit later, to species in decline throughout its range. Also the ruffled grouse and cerulean warbler that are also species that have been disappearing from New Jersey. We lead efforts to protect horseshoe crabs, whose eggs provide the much needed energy source for the red knot, which is a powerhouse shorebird that does that migration I just referred to from the tip of South America all the way to the Canadian Arctic. And in between, it feeds on the horseshoe crab eggs right here in Delaware Bay. So in short, healthy habitats protect wildlife populations. Focused, specific, and achievable goals have helped us to see success in areas where we work. Urban and suburban areas are growing in significance as they surround and penetrate the forested and grassland habitat where we have typically focused our study and our work. Next slide. So there's various ways that we connect all people with nature. We have programs in where we teach sustainability in the classroom. We've been more focused on that since the climate change education mandate that was instituted by the First Lady's office last year. We're very intimately involved in helping teachers to bring climate change education into their classrooms. We do outreach to schools and communities. We serve as a co-chair on the Commission for Environmental Education in the state, various internship programs. We have a corporate stewardship council that serves to inform and advise on some of the work that we do for with landowners, rec programs, community science, and advocacy. Next slide. So I'm going to start with some of our advocacy work, and then we're going to segue into the education and research and monitoring work. They're all linked together. We work together on all of the projects you're going to hear about today, but for ease in presentation, I'm kind of separating it out a little bit. So I'm going to talk about advocacy and policy just a little bit. We do this primarily in two ways. through our work with coalitions, and we have two major coalitions that are in our government relations group, the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed and the Keep It Green Coalition. And the other way that we forward policy is through direct advocacy. We work with state and federal legislators and with state and federal agencies, again, to promote habitat protections and policies that protect wildlife. Next slide. And I want to talk a little bit more about the two coalitions because I'm not too sure if people are familiar with them. First are Cdrw, the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. This coalition unites organizations working throughout the region, not just in New Jersey, but New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware, to enhance their capacity to advocate for protecting and restoring the Delaware River Basin. Since 2012, the coalition has brought together partners to advocate primarily for federal funding and comprehensive watershed-wide planning. We've successfully advocated for the introduction and passage of the Delaware River Basin Conservation Act and secured historic federal funds to restore and conserve the watershed. These federal investments through the Delaware River Basin Restoration Program produce results in communities across the watershed. And in the this year and upcoming years, we're primarily focused in traditionally disadvantaged communities across the watershed. We're constantly evolving. Serious threats remain, including polluted runoff and aging drinking and wastewater infrastructure and the threats of climate change. So the need for protection and restoration of the basin is not decreasing. In fact, it's urgent and it's constant for all the 13 million people who live there and the wildlife that depend upon it. So throughout the course of 2020, we saw just how important clean water is and equitable access to outdoor recreation. Towards that end, we developed a 5-year strategic direction based on member organization input. We just did this past summer, and it was really an important exercise, and one that I think you'll agree really reflects the priorities for the region. Our number one goal, and this was a unanimous goal of all 167 members, is to address systemic racism. The coalition will advance its diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice efforts to serve as a clearinghouse for resources and peer-to-peer learning. This didn't come out of nowhere. The coalition has been working tirelessly on DEIJ issues, and in fact has a DEIJ work group that has authored a toolkit for all of the member organizations to use, including New Jersey Audubon. It's a toolkit that helps organizations to identify and address racism and equity issues at their individual organizations. That is goal 1 for Cdrw for the upcoming 5 years. Goal 2, as a convener of organizations throughout the region, the coalition will strive to empower and engage a larger, more inclusive constituency to support watershed-wide planning and advocacy initiatives. Again, you can see the importance of DEIJ issues in our second goal as well. The third of 5 goals is that the coalition will advocate for robust federal restoration funding to support the watershed's restoration and protection needs. This is a fundamental priority for the coalition. Fourth goal will ensure federal and state policies, spending, and implementation support a resilient and healthy Delaware River watershed. And then fifth, the coalition will respond in a swift and unified manner to defend the watershed against emergent and systemic threats on the state and federal level as they relate to our mission of protecting and restoring the land and waters of the Delaware River Basin, i.e. climate change and impacts due to climate change. So that's our coalition for the Delaware River watershed. I'd also like to give a little summary on our other coalition that's housed within government relation, and that is the Keep It Green Coalition. It's an active coalition of over 150 organizations. Some are the same as are in the Cdrw coalition, but while the Cdrw focuses on the Delaware River region, Keep It Green is a New Jersey statewide coalition. We're committed to land conservation, agriculture, historic preservation, environmental protection, urban parks, hunting and fishing, other forms of outdoor recreation. So it's a little bit more expansive as well. New Jersey Keep It Green led efforts to pass statewide bond measures, two that passed in 2009 and 2011, together provided $600 million for the State Green Acres Program, farmland preservation, and historic preservation programs. And following those successes, Keep It Green led a campaign to secure a long-term sustainable source of funding to ensure permanent protection of critical lands and waters throughout the state. Y'all might remember in 2014, it was a ballot measure. New Jersey voters overwhelmingly approved a measure to dedicate existing corporate business tax funds to substantially provide long-term open space, park, farmland, and historic preservation efforts. It provides $1 billion every 10 years for preservation and stewardship. So following this, we're looking at additional campaigns to feed off of our successes. We are in the research phase now, hoping to work with disadvantaged communities to really come up with a policy campaign to incorporate preservation and stewardship of lands throughout the state, not just focused on rural and wild areas this time, but really to include urban and suburban areas. How can we best preserve and steward and maintain open space and parkland for all people in the state of New Jersey? That's where we are right now in the Keep It Green Coalition. So that was a long way to describe our two coalitions, but I thought it was important for folks to know about them and their successes. So next slide. And I promise you this one's shorter because you already heard a lot about the advocacy work. So our advocacy work on behalf, again, of all people, accessible open space and parks for all people. You heard a lot about how we do that through our coalition work. We also work with organizations, our partners in the NGO sphere, decision makers, to develop policy positions that are founded on science and to conduct outreach, advocacy, and partnership building to advance our positions. We continue to prioritize the work that I've talked about and add additional issues as they pop up, such as offshore wind development and other renewable energy projects, funding for our state parks, and natural infrastructure projects. So again, all of the work that we do is done in partnership with others because one voice is not enough. All of our voices are really necessary in order to achieve the results that we want to achieve in New Jersey. So that I'll advance the next slide. And I will turn it over to Kelly.
Great, thank you, Eileen. That was a wonderful overview. So in my position as project director for urban education outreach, I get to go all over the state and interact with people everywhere, which I love. So I like being connected to a center, but it's also fun to see new communities. And oftentimes though, when I say my job title, they say, oh, you teach in cities? Because oftentimes we think of challenges in urban areas, right? We think of, broken windows, abandoned buildings. We think of, plastic and garbage littered all over the place, graffiti and just not clean spaces. However, I never see cities that way. I focus on opportunities because our cities in New Jersey in particular have such unique history and character and people that there's so many opportunities. So the land of opportunities are our urban centers. You have wonderful art mixing with, sort of habitat restoration, people getting creative with their spaces because they have to. I do hikes with kids around their block. I call them block walks to see what we find. And these ants attacking a potato chip or Dorito were like the study of, kept 20 kids busy for about 45 minutes because they were watching, where are the ants going? Where are they taking the food back to? Can they carry the whole Dorito? I don't know, but it was really fun exploring with these kids on that Dorito. Birding right on the street outside of the school. Some people might poo-poo the European starling or grackles or robins, but in the words of our colleague Pete Dunn, he says, well, have you ever seen that robin before? Well, no, probably not. So every bird, every wild animal is important and special. So they're right in your community all the time. And again, in urban spaces, we have to get creative with our spaces, use old infrastructure that might have been abandoned to create new life, and getting the kids outside, really understanding their neighborhood so that we're not always pounding into their heads, oh, you have to go somewhere else to learn about nature, right? You can learn about nature right around the block. Yes, it's nice to travel to other places, but it's right in your community as well. And, the bald eagle is one of the kind of signs of the times, right? Bald eagles are now nesting in New Jersey at great numbers, and it's not just in the Hinda-Yonders of Hunterdon County. They are nesting in very urban spaces, again, taking advantage of easy food and great nesting locations. And this is a letter that a child wrote several years ago as a relate to a trip with New Jersey Audubon. So I first saw a red-tailed hawk following two fighting American robins. Then I realized that they were not fighting, but trying to scare the hawk away. It was sitting on top of a baseball that was curved over home plate. I was startled and soon found out how great this sighting was. It stayed there for a few minutes. Then it flew to a tree and stayed there for 10 minutes. The funny thing was that the smaller birds, starlings, blue jays, robins, titmice, and mockingbirds were mobbing the lone creature. It was bothered by this and flew from tree to tree, trying to find a peaceful place. Unsuccessful, it flew and left the park. I was real happy I got to see this in a park I go to every day. So these are places that kids walk through every day that they get to see with new eyes. So our mission, as Eileen stated before, is a twofold mission. So connecting all people with nature. So we've got, again, it's making those connections, I work more with children, although in the days of COVID, I'm working with more and more adults. But getting kids outside, this is in Branch Brook Park, this is in Linden Hawkrise, all ages, all walks of life, up to a Hawk Watch platform in Montclair. This platform is 5-10 minute bus ride from their school, but they wouldn't have known it was there unless we showed it to them, right? Sharing nature with kids at our nature sanctuaries, bringing them out so that they can pick up worms and discover things in the leaves. And then stewarding the nature of today. So we do community cleanups, habitat restoration with the Scouts, again, community plantings in more urban spaces. Some of our summer camps and summer programs get kids dirty and sweaty over the summer, which is how they're supposed to be. And making cool binoculars with toilet paper tubes. And that's for all, people in the future. So from here out, Kristen and I are going to sort of back and forth, and there's a few case studies that we'd like to share with you that just exemplify sort of what Eileen was talking about, of us really finding the intersection between all of our departments to make these projects happen. So they're not just education programs. So, and again, to her point with the Keep It Green Coalition and working with urban communities, what is cool about these 3 case studies in particular is that these communities came to us and said, hey, you know, we've seen you do programs, maybe I've done an after school program, or we've seen your work, you know, in habitat restoration, et cetera. We have this piece of land, we have this program, we really want to make it better, you know, can you help us? So it's really working with communities that, you know, just don't know where to go, and we're more than happy to help them come to their vision too. And one of the most exciting places was a small little place at the Metro YMCA of the Oranges, right in the heart of Orange. So in the lower left picture are these antiquated dry wells. I'd been doing after school programs here for a couple of years, and we use this grassy patch to play games and stuff because it's the only grassy patch there is. And one day, I don't know, I think the executive director came out and said, what are these things? Like, can we just rip them up? And I said, I don't know, let's research it. Do you have a plan of your building? You know, what is it? So we found out from like a community member who had been a member of the Y for like 40 years or something, that the downspout, which is white right here, used to be connected into this well. And ironically, I don't know if you can tell, but over here is like a parking lot area. And so the downspout went this way and then shot out on the parking lot. And they said, yeah, and in the wintertime, man, this whole parking lot is just ice. Nobody wants to park there. Like, it was a problem. So we kind of worked together with facilities. I called in John Park from our stewardship team, and we kind of figured out that these wells still work, but they were for some reason disconnected, and nobody knows why they were ever disconnected. So they did some tests, and you know, we weren't like flooding the basement or anything. So we made rain gardens, and all in all, they had 4 or 5 of these, I forget. And again, with the help of stewardship and a lot of partnerships. So we partnered with the Y, New Jersey Corporate Wetlands. We got some funding there. We got some WIP money for wetlands restoration. We created these rain gardens in each of the 5 dry wells. And what we did is we took each sort of physiographic region in the state, identified a few plant species that were sort of indicative, and we made each dry well was its own little like habitat, and then they each had a sign that goes with them. So now when I do after school programs at the Y, you know, we do our after school programs, but it's also about learning about New Jersey, learning about plants, learning about rainwater harvesting. They have a rain barrel here for their garden that they made in the corner. So it really becomes, you know, a well-rounded program, not just, you know, like an environmental education program. It's based on a lot of the work that we're doing in stewardship and research. Another thing that, you know, gets kids out and connected to nature in our urban areas is our Celebrate Urban Birds, which is through Cornell, our Hawks Aloft program, which works with a school in Newark and Patterson to introduce them to hawks and hawk migration. And then our after school programs, we call it On Call because I go out to them. So we, you know, we visit neighborhoods. I love this picture because there's like the little tiny bird is in a tree, and it doesn't care that all the kids are standing right here and they're so close and they're still using their binoculars and like, oh my gosh, miss, the bird is so big. Like, just look at it with your eyes. It's not that, it's right there. But they were so excited because it wasn't moving. And then, you know, of course, I do my education programs. But it's really about getting out into the community. You can't do this work from a desk, really. You have to meet people, you have to talk to people, you have to understand where they're coming from, you have to understand their community drive around. Where's the best food? You know, what intersections are always clogged that you can sit and watch birds while you're at a red light? Where's the river? Where does it flood? All these kind of things. Where are the favorite parks? You have to understand the community and go in to do this work to make it effective and long lasting. Oh, there's another one. So our first case study, I'll introduce it and then Kristen's kind of going to take the bat. So this one is very unique. So Petty's Island is a partnership between New Jersey Audubon, Citgo, because they own Petty's Island right now, the New Jersey Natural Lands Trust, and then we have a couple of subcontractors that we work with in the Delaware Riverkeeper and one of the local watershed associations. So Petty's is, you know, a 300-acre island in the middle of the Delaware River. The picture in the upper left is an old aerial photo because it still shows all of the human influence on the island, the oil storage tanks and the Crowley Marine parking lot, which is about 55 acres. All of the human structure has since been removed as the island transitions back to sort of a more natural state. So there, unfortunately, the island is not open yet to the public. It is in transition, like I said, and hopefully in 2 to 4 more years, all the contamination will be cleaned up on the island, and the island will be turned over in full to the state of New Jersey for the residents. So it will probably not be a state park as we know it, but it will be state owned, probably managed by another organization. And so right now I get to take people out on special trips and do cleanups and have field trips, hopefully again next year, and some birding field trips. So history walks. It's a very interesting place. There's a lot going on there, and Kristen will talk a little bit more about some of the research and monitoring that that's going on there, and some of the stewardship work that is already taking place.
All right, so thanks Kelly, and thanks Eileen for that great start to the presentation. And as Kelly mentioned, I'll talk about the research and monitoring that we are doing at Petty's Island, and specifically looking at bird use of the island. We started surveys in 2014 and are continuing to do those as the restoration continues. So really quickly, our objectives here are to document use by birds and other wildlife, and to do that in a scientific way. So in a way that's systematic and repeatable and comparable with other sites and other studies. And also to assess the response of these populations to restoration activities and habitat change on the island. Okay, next slide. And our methods for doing this, we're using standardized point count surveys and transect surveys. So we're visiting the island 3 to 4 times during each season. So spring migration, breeding season, where we are right now, fall migration, and winter. And I just love seeing the island during all of these seasons and seeing the different birds that are using them and the different just views that you see throughout the year. Okay, next slide, please. So I'll repeat a little bit of what Kelly said here. This is Petty's Island. It's about 300 acres, just over 300 acres. And this is what the island looked like when we started in 2013, just before we started surveys. And you can see the shipping container facility area in the center of the island. You can see the oil storage tanks remaining on the island. And then the next slide will show what the island looks like now. I think this was 2019 or 2020, but you can see that shipping containers have been removed, the asphalt has been removed, and it has been restored to grassland habitat. So that's really amazing. And the oil storage tanks have also been removed. So all really great news for birds and wildlife. So I'll briefly show some of the highlights from the surveys that we've been doing. Since we started in 2014, we've recorded over 140 different bird species using the island. And that includes 3 state endangered species. I'll talk a little bit more about bald eagle at the end, pied-billed grebe, red-shouldered hawk, in many cases, and many observations of red-shouldered hawk throughout the years. And also same thing with the threatened species, kestrels, American kestrel, we've seen regularly using the island. And I'll talk more about that when I get to the grassland habitat. Osprey also use the river for foraging, and then 16 state species of special concern. And that's a wide variety of different migrant songbirds and shorebirds and water birds and raptors. So just a whole lot of species using this island of habitat in this such a developed area. Okay, next slide, please. So I'll just walk you through some of the different habitats on the island and some of the species that we find using these habitats. So starting off with the forested habitat. So we're focusing mostly on about 76 acres of forest at the southern end of the island. And we see greatest diversity during migration periods, which is not surprising because we have a whole lot of diversity of warblers and thrushes and flycatchers and other migrants that are using the site for stopover habitat during those periods. Breeding species, we also have a lot of the common songbirds, woodpeckers, yellow-billed cuckoo is an interesting one. Wild turkeys, you almost always see them when you're on the island. Red-shouldered hawk we've had throughout the breeding season, and bald eagle also, which I'll have a photo at the end of for bald eagle. So I'll save that. All right, I think we're good. Wetland habitats on the island. So we have these, the photo in the center is one of the more interior wetlands. So we have these pockets of wetlands within the forested habitat. And we have migratory waterfowl, wood ducks nesting, pied-billed grebe has been seen in there on multiple occasions, herons and egrets. And then we have of course, the river and the areas, mudflats and marshes around the river. So shorebirds during migration, gulls and terns, waterfowl again, osprey, bald eagle, use it for foraging, and of course, herons and egrets. Okay, next slide, please. And then the restored grassland. So this photo in the center is the area that was that former shipping container area. It was asphalt, and that has been removed and restored to grassland, which is amazing. And we added this to our survey in 2020. So it's new and it's exciting. And in that first year, we saw killdeer using it. I suspect they were breeding there. We saw them during their breeding period. The wild turkeys are out there. We see indigo buntings around the edge. Swallows and aerial insectivores are using it. And late in the season, we had a number of American kestrels using it. So late summer and through the fall last year, multiple individuals seen on multiple visits, which is really exciting. And we've seen savanna sparrows using it during migration, with the hope that some more of these grassland species will breed there as the restoration matures. So that is to come. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, so many American kestrels that
so
we
many.
blew up eBird, and whoever
Yes.
the surveyor for the South said, there's no way there's 12 kestrels there. Yes, there was.
Yes, yes. And then I saved the bald eagle photo for the last. This year, 2021, we have bald eagles nesting on the island again for the first time in, I'm not sure, Kelly, do you know the last time they nested on the island?
I want to say 2006.
Yeah, it's been quite a while. So that was a really exciting find, and you can see the one young eagle that we can see there in this nest. This was from back in May. So he's a little bit older now, and hopefully we'll be fledging out of the nest soon.
Excellent. Yeah,
So,
this, if you're not familiar with sort of the saga that is Petty's Island, one of the reasons why the land was preserved and not developed is because of a bald eagle was nesting on the island. So between that and the economy tanking in 2008 and some legislative pressure, it is quite a soap opera if you want to read up on it. You know, the island was preserved, you know, because wildlife decided to make its home there. So this is kind of like, you know, as we're beginning the transformation, the restoration of the island back to a more natural state, it's just, you know, like the icing on the cake, you know, here's this animal that's coming back, giving us a signal like, yeah, you're going in the right direction. So it's a good sign.
yes.
So a very similar location actually is Hawkrise in Lyndon. And I say similar because not only are they sort of on the outskirts of an urban area, so Petty's is technically Pennsauken, although it's right across the river from Camden, between Camden and Philadelphia. You know, Hawkrise is in Lyndon, right on the Rahway River. But interestingly, their habitats offerings are very similar. And, you know, they're all jammed together in this small area, which I think is why we see such great diversity. So at Lyndon Hawkrise, we have, you know, a landfill, which is essentially grassland habitat. We have saltwater marsh, and we also have, you know, inland wetland forests that are freshwater. So it's just a really interesting place. And again, this was in partnership with the city of Lyndon. I will say it wasn't, you know, like all roses and everything to get it started. I mean, it is part of their administrative consent order with the closing of the landfill, but it came about because a teacher, the science supervisor at the time, Dolores Maslow in Lyndon, saw this as an opportunity, saw this space as, you know, the Meadowlands in Lyndon, and said, why do we have to go to the Meadowlands when we have the habitat right here in Lyndon? I want all of our kids to learn about this unique habitat right here in Lyndon. And so she reached out, you know, to New Jersey Audubon, and we forged, you know, a great partnership. So again, we do tons of stuff at Hawkrise Sanctuary. And this is one of those areas where the Keep It Green Coalition is really important, because Lyndon was one of the first, if not the first, municipality to create their public access plan for the waterfront. And a big piece of that was Lyndon Hawkrise. So, you know, you see the children in the bottom right-hand photograph, you know, locked out of essentially green space in an urban area. We want to make sure that green spaces are available for everyone to use. So Hawkrise is a great example of, you know, you build it and they will come. People of every walk of life come and use this sanctuary. We do lots of stewardship and education programs. And again, we have our monitoring here at Hawkrise. So I will let Kristen take that part over.
All right. So thanks again. And again, I'll talk about the research and the bird monitoring and assessment work that we're doing at Hawkrise. And I just first wanted to mention some of the citizen science or community science work that is ongoing really at the sanctuary. And very significantly, since the boardwalk opened, I think it was in 2012, had over 1,600 checklists submitted to eBird. So birders are out there, they're collecting data. We use the eBird data when we write our reports, and it's out there for other people to use as well. And just briefly, the New Jersey Audubon Citizen Science Program, specifically harbor heron research that was done a couple of years ago, and that would be Nellie Sapora's work. It was one of, Lyndon Hawkeye Sanctuary was one of the sites where volunteers went out to count herons and egrets foraging in these habitats throughout northeastern New Jersey, but including Hawkeye Sanctuary. So it's connected with these larger data sets about these birds that are so exciting. So lots of fun stuff going on, and that will bring us to our next slide, which is the work that we are doing, New Jersey Audubon specifically, with staff, again, documenting the use of these habitats by birds and other wildlife, and assessing the response of populations to restoration activities and habitat change. Very similar to what we talked about at Petty's Island. So similar methodology, standardized point counts during each of the 4 seasons, again, and transects, point counts and transects, depending on what season it is. Okay, next slide. So this is what Lyndon Hawkeye looks like from the air. And I think the forest is about 37 acres. The landfill, I don't have the number off the top of my
55.
head, but 55, there we go. Thanks, Kelly. So the landfill is restored grassland habitat, a little bit older than the grassland habitat at Petty's Island, so it's a little bit more developed. We also have the salt marshes along the river, so really a diverse area, and we have our survey points on here, so we're surveying all of those different habitats.
We can't get away from those oil storage facilities,
yes.
Right?
Yes. So this is a project that we started in 2010. So we've been doing it a little bit longer, over 10 years now. And some of the highlights, so we've documented almost 180 bird species using the site during our own surveys, and then 42 species that have been reported to eBird by eBird users visiting the site. So a total of 220 species documented using the area. Again, 6 state endangered species, a bald eagle. There is a nest not too far away in Lyndon. I don't know exactly where it is, but we often see them foraging or are using the habitat at the sanctuary. Black skimmer, we've seen foraging along the river, least tern, northern harrier over the marshes, over the landfill, peregrine falcons, pied-billed grebe in the wetlands. State threatened species, American kestrel. So some of these species are really similar. And we see that kestrels using the landfill, the grassland habitat. During migration, bobolinks, breeding grasshopper sparrows in some years, horned larks during migration, osprey along the river. There's now a platform for nesting osprey, and they've been breeding the last 2 years. Savannah sparrows breeding on the landfill as well. And then a whole list again of species of special concern. So migrant songbirds, shorebirds, water birds, a wide variety of different species. Okay. And again, I'll just walk you through some of the habitats on the site, starting with the Hawkeye forest. So the picture in the center, you can see the boardwalk trail that runs through the forested area, and you can also hopefully make out the deer fence. So there is a deer fence to keep the deer out and hopefully restore some of the native vegetation. And similar to Petty's Island, greatest diversity of birds we find during migration periods. Again, not surprising, but great stopover habitat for warblers, thrushes, flycatchers, other migrants. For breeding species in the forest, we've had wood thrush through the breeding season as late as last year, and hopefully that'll continue as the undergrowth starts to develop more, especially in that fenced off area. A variety of the more common songbirds and woodpeckers, great horned owl we've documented breeding. We've had wild turkeys, but they have not been there in the last few years. But really a fun place to walk around. Okay. And then of course, the Rahway River and the surrounding marshes, foraging habitat for, again, bald eagles, black skimmer, a lot of those threatened and endangered species, breeding habitat for osprey, a lot of the common marsh birds, marsh wrens, common yellowthroats, willow flycatcher, secret of marsh birds. We have documented Virginia rail, clapper rail, least bittern, American bittern was an eBird sighting. So these areas are really being used by a lot of species. And some of these, like secretive marsh birds, are very hard to detect. So we might not be picking up all of the species on our surveys. A wide variety of them. And then the grassland habitat. So Lyndon Landfill, we have breeding savanna sparrows, state threatened. We've had grasshopper sparrows in previous years. Maybe they'll be there this year. Migratory and winter habitat, again, for eastern meadowlarks, for bobolinks, horned larks, dickcissel we've had on multiple occasions, American kestrels, northern harrier. So really exciting to have these species in Lyndon.
And this is another instance where communication is key, because yes. We learned a lot about managing landfills doing this project, because I really didn't understand that, landfills have to be mowed with regularity so that they don't succeed, right? So you don't want tree roots and things growing down into the cap of your landfill. And so in the beginning, they were just kind of mowing whenever the DEP told them to mow, you can't let it get so high, et cetera. So we really had to work with DEP and the city of Lyndon, because they manage their own landfill, to come up with a mowing schedule that would not impact the birds in, breeding or migratory. So, it's just, there's a lot to consider, and you don't think of, some of these, the human structures, how they would positively, really impact wildlife, and then how we have to manage them so that we're not, kind of reverting, taking away any positive impact. So it's just a very interesting consideration for this site.
I think I have one more slide. Again, Lyndon Landfill. So this past winter, over the winter of 2020, 2021, Lyndon has installed a solar array on the top of the landfill, which is very exciting. And it will also be interesting to see how these grassland birds that are using it respond to that. And I'll say that I was there yesterday and I heard I heard singing savanna sparrows. So they are there. They are still using it, but stay tuned and we will provide an update on that. Yeah.
Thanks, Kristen. So I guess this kind of, just to wrap up a little bit, again, New Jersey Audubon sort of has our pillars, and we really try not to work exclusively in our own silo. So we try to, reach through all of our departmental sort of expertise and find ways to, to build on the things that we're doing, so that, our research sort of informs, everyone else. What lands are we going to steward? How are we going to do that? And then, let those, and what are we going to advocate for? And then the education piece, really, because it's not just about, summer camp and bird walks. We do a lot of different kinds of education programs, including, our Gardening for Wildlife, which is a nice intersection between stewardship and education, and hopefully advocacy in the Keep It Green space, and that's what it's sort of all about. So just saying, environmental education or environmental advocacy or land stewardship, you really need all the pieces, to sort of work together, and then the partnerships within those spaces, like we highlighted before. So it's not New Jersey Audubon just going in and interjecting and saying, you need this. It's really a community partnership, so that everybody understands what the needs and wants and outcomes are, so that we can all provide the best, service to those towns that have these urban spaces. So Eileen, Kristen, I don't know, do you have anything else to add to wrap up? Last thoughts? If not, we're on to sort of our questions and comments. I forgot I made it spin.
Yes. That's good.